Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Today's event, if software is eating the world, who is feeding the beast? In 2011, venture capitalist Marc Andreessen famously declared that software was eating the world. Not only has the past decade proven him right, but the pandemic, this relentless innovation powered by artificial intelligence, has now accelerated exponentially beyond what many of us could have imagined before COVID-19. And today we have a lively panel to discuss this very topic. We have Arjun Jamnadass, who leads the citizen development team within FTI Consulting, which is part of PMI, Project Management Institute. Arjun is an expert in citizen development, agile ways of working, digital transformation, and business change. And Arjun has spent the last 5 years working with business and technology leaders to establish new ways of working, which enable scalable and safe mass adoption of low and no code technologies. Arjun also earned his bachelor's degree in computer and business studies and a master's degree in electronic business management from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom, where he joins us today. Also on the panel, we have Hung Lee. Hung is an industry professional with over 15 years of experience as an agency recruiter, recruitment manager, internal head of talent, recruitment trainer, founder and winning online recruitment platform Workshape.io, and now editor and community builder at Recruiting Brainfood, the best weekly newsletter on recruitment. If you haven't subscribed, I would highly recommend it. Hung also is joining us from the United Kingdom. And to round out our panel and lively discussion today about jobs of the future, we have our very own Charlie Oliver. Charlie is the founder and CEO of Tech 2025, where we prepare people and companies for the technological future through upskilling and live events. And everyone, we'd like to welcome you to the event. Thank you for bearing with us for the technical difficulties because, tech's got to do what it's got to do. So if you have questions or comments, please do not be afraid to use the chat. We want to have a discussion here, and the only way we can discuss with you is if you let us know what it is you're thinking and what you want to learn about. So with that, welcome to the event. Charlie, please take us over.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You're amazing. We are going to start with, let me just change my view. I'm so sorry. I'm going to change it to speaker view for a minute. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Charlie Oliver. I'm the founder and CEO of Tech 2025, as Stephen just said. Stephen, thank you again for just making everything so much better with your presence and your professionalism. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. I want to start by saying that this is a really robust conversation that we're having today, okay? We know that this is something that a lot of people are thinking about, and if they aren't thinking about it, they probably should be. So for those of you who are here because you're curious, welcome. For those of you who are here because you already know something about this and you're trying to learn more, welcome. This is going to be a conversation that will hopefully inform all of us, which is really important. So let's get this started. I'm going to actually, let me just go ahead and get started with our speakers because I want you guys to know exactly who they are and sort of what they do, which is really important. Arjun, you're a strategic advisor at PMI, and Hung, you're an editor for Brainfood, Recruiting Brainfood, which I love. I'm an avid fan of your newsletter, and founder of Workshape.io. Now, I'd like for both of you to sort of explain to us exactly what your organizations do, what your roles are there specifically, and sort of how you're working or want to work with no code, low code software, or just in the ecosystem.
Sure.
Start with Hung.
Arjun, let me go.
Sure.
So yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm coming at it at a very, I think I'm coming at it from the majority point of view, Charlie. So I am in touch with tens of thousands of TA and HR professionals worldwide as a result of curating the Recruiting Brainfood community. And I'm coming at this conversation really from a point of view is that I don't think that community knows enough about low code, no code. I believe that they're way behind the curve. It's not even a priority item on any of the lists that people are talking about. There's other super important issues, of course, that HR have to be concerned with. But I don't believe that they're fully aware as to the potential of this next suite of technologies that might transform the way in which technology is produced. So I guess I'm coming at it really with a huge amount of curiosity. I want to represent as best I can the TA and HR community, and I want to kind of present their situation, as well as better understand, how we move the low code, no code concept into the places where it needs to go. Because as custodians of organizations and companies, this is something we really do need to know a hell of a lot more than we currently do.
Awesome.
Great. So yeah, I'm coming from this from a slightly different angle. So as Charlie mentioned, I've been advising PMI on this phenomenon that we call citizen development, right? It's actually a term that was coined by Gartner, but it seems to be the prevailing term. So we just rode with it. I've been doing this for the last 2 years, and in fact, it started off by doing an assessment of the market, right? Is this thing a fad? Is it just another passing piece of hype, right, that will soon settle? And yes, about 2 years ago, we did this, and I embarked on a pretty long journey of interviewing a whole bunch of people, right? So it was people who represented every corner of the industry. We had academics and professors, we had titans of industry, C-suite, leaders of Fortune 100 companies. We had actual citizen developers out there in the wild, and consultants, and also representatives from the vendors. So we really, built out a good view about this, that, right, this isn't just a bit of hype, right? This is actually, it's really exciting. It's here. And organizations are starting to take note. Of course, this movement has started off and really spread its wings in the B2C arena, right? If anyone's used Wix or Squarespace to set up a website, you would know it, right? But it's now really starting to resonate in the enterprise space. And that's really what I've been spending my time as an advisor for PMI been doing. So, building the educational content, courses, writing a book on the subject, and really acting as an ambassador in this space for, the enterprise space. Right? Because ultimately they're going to be the big employers.
They most certainly are. I love that the both of you are sort of, this rounds out our panel really nicely. And I know PMI very well. I know the work that you guys do, a lot of us do, whether you're a project manager or not. And I actually spoke on a panel, on a no-code citizen developer panel a few weeks ago, and it was awesome. And we had such a great and passionate conversation. I think people who are in this space, if there's one thing that we can say, is that they are very sort of passionate about the idea of furthering this cause, because, which we'll get into on the panel, it has a lot to do. It's not just about business, it's about people being empowered to create technologies and to sort of run with innovation the way they've been told that they can't in the past. So having said that, here at T25, we also work in this space as well. And I had a client, we had a client 3 years ago, actually, in the no-code space. They actually one of the oldest no-code companies or low-code companies out there. So I was very fortunate to be involved in it and to talk to a lot of IT managers, their customers, and the web in the development community. So we're going to get into this. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with the definition and of everything that we're talking about, because everybody's coming from different spaces. We have non-tech, we have tech people. So first and foremost, and we're going to get into the questions now, I'm just going to with regards to the title, which I got a lot of feedback on, people were like, "Oh, that's awesome! Software is eating the world." So I'm going to ask you guys about this. So this is basically where that term comes from. If you're not familiar with it, and Marc Andreessen, who is the general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a VC firm, he's also a software developer himself in his previous life, engineer. So he comes from a tech background, and he 10 years ago, August 20th, right, 2011, it'll be like the 10-year anniversary, he wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal. And in that article, he said this. I'm not going to read it, but he basically said, here are the trends that are kind of happening. This is the opening paragraph, by the way. He didn't waste any time getting into it. And he said, basically, between all of the the things that are happening and sort of intertwining, we're looking at software eating the world. So that's where this term comes from. And I just want to ask the panel, I just want to ask you, Hung and Arjun, I mean, are we in agreement with this? Is there anyone out there that disagrees with this? Are we, software is eating the world, right? Okay, just want to be sure. If not, just let me know. So let's get into this. Hung, you do a weekly live stream podcast sort of discussing some of the most vexing issues in HR for HR people. And right now, I imagine that being in HR is both exciting and terrifying for a number of reasons. So what I would like you to do is sort of tell us just a couple of things that, just so that we can understand how HR is thinking about this very, very unusual time that we're in. Just give us 3 things that you're hearing from HR professionals about what's really troubling them, not just now, but what they're looking at down the road in the next 2 or 3 years.
You know what? I think COVID-19 has really been a huge boulder in the path that HR was going towards, and it's pivoted the entire industry off in a direction that I don't think would have happened without COVID-19. Here's what was really important prior in the before times, right? Before this happened. There was a much bigger scope, I think, for the use of automation, the use of process automation coming into the world of HR. So in other words, let's optimize, let's get more efficient, let's do things ultimately with less people. That was the unspoken sort of idea behind automation. Let's be more efficient, but ultimately, less people, more work, increase productivity, quote unquote. However, what has happened since COVID-19 is that we've had a real fundamental shakeup as to what the value of efficiency is. We're now looking at sort of the world of work saying, you know what, are we over optimizing for efficiency? Has that been a contributing factor for our mismanagement of the pandemic? Like, have we just ran it too lean, ran it too skinny with no kind of buffer, no redundancy? And that's caused systemic collapse because we ran it so taut. Should we now actually create processes and systems that are a little bit more redundant, quote unquote, resilient? So this is the resilience versus efficiency argument. Resilience ultimately means a bit of fat in your system. Now, what this means with regards to automation is that I think automation has literally gone down the priority list. The conversation in HR now is, you know what, we need to recenter it among human beings. We need to be people-centric rather than process-orientated. We need to basically spend more time human to human than actually being overly focused on just super efficient way of executing. Now, I think what that does is shift the entire conversation on low code, no code, which I think at pre-COVID was getting there, right? It would have got there. It's put a roadblock there, and we've pivoted down the other road. So the conversation at HR, and by the way, this is not to say good or bad either way, right? But the unit of analysis right now, if you look at it from an organization perspective, they're talking about what is ethical to do, what is empathetic to do, what is the right thing to do? Are we moving away from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, which involves all of the workers? So the energy, the mental energy in the HR industry is focused on really remaking the companies into those types of institutions. And there is an aversion to over-optimization right now. Because there's a sense that, you know what, what's happening with, and I know no code, low code is not exactly automation, but it's within the same milieu of activity to try and get more efficient using technology. And there is, I think, an unfortunate consequence is that it's kind of dropped off the radar screen for HR folks. They're not seeing, for instance, what Arjun is about to say, I think, about the democratic value of tool creation and the distribution of the ability to produce apps and stuff like this, amazing stuff. That's no longer at the moment on the horizon. So it's going to take us a little while to get there because we've got to get beyond the COVID thing. And it's basically been a huge boulder in the road. It's the river was going this way. It's now gone this way as a result of it.
Okay, I can see that's an incredible answer. I actually didn't expect you to say that. Arjun, I can see you gripping your chair right now. And I want to know why, because here's the thing, Hung, what makes me sort of go, what? Is that while HR is moving more towards people centricity, people actually are moving more towards tech and they really want the hard, I don't know. Let me just, Arjun, I need you to respond to that. What is it that you're hearing that's making you like,
I quite liked what Hung was saying, actually. I like the fact that companies are starting to think about the people, right? And not thinking about how to do more with less. Although that still seems to be a prevailing theme amongst, well, it depends who you're talking to, but certainly in the HR space, it's great to see that. But ultimately, I mean, citizen development isn't necessarily about, halting what you're doing. It's about trying to do the things that you previously couldn't do, right? Take for example, right? One of the biggest challenges we have today, which is, where the answer is citizen development, is the fact that we have a massive lack of software developers, and that trend is continuing to increase. I think US labor statistics said there will be 1.6 million computer science or IT jobs in the market, and only about 400,000 graduates in the space. So there's a pretty large gap, and we're seeing that extend, right? Mm-hmm. What we have is demand, a situation where demand is exceeding supply massively, and it's increasing so. And IT departments are facing the brunt of this, right? They're struggling. And what does this mean? It means that a lot of demand from the business is going unaddressed, or it's just festering in the backlog. And depending on where you are, that demand will continue to fester and probably even drop off the backlog, because there are simply other priorities. The IT team needs to prioritize its scarce resources. And so, what you have is typically people have to accept the status quo. They have to continue to work with less than ideal processes, or, they take matters into their own hand and, go rogue and start to look at shadow IT, which no one really wants. So it's quite heartening to see that HR departments are, in general, looking at preserving the human centricity of all of this all. But, from where I see it, there's still a mad rush to address this big gaping problem, which is the shortage of software developers.
Let's talk about that.
I would add one thing on this, by the way. Even though I've kind of observed this is the situation with HR, doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, because I do think we need to push ahead. Absolutely, with I think it is fair to say the democratization of app production. I think that's a very important thing to do. I just think that HR, unfortunately, has now been shuffled down the list of things that were super urgent for HR to think about. And it might be, using your wonderful term, Arjun, it might be that the individual user will end up producing solutions at a very local level without, if you like, formal authority from the business, and then producing those solutions really from ground up type of situation. And we're already seeing some evidence of that, actually, with some of the more technically minded people in HR and TA teams.
Now, this is great. This is actually, we're going to sort of hop all over the place with regards to the questioning based on where this goes. And I just want to be sure before we move on to the next thing with regards to defining these two terms, low code and no code, which turns out to be a big thing. And it's a little contentious, okay, for a number of reasons. And also what the problem is that we believe these technologies are solving, or that citizen developing will be solving. So really quickly, I'm just gonna share this really right now, because Gartner seems to be, out of all of the consultancies and the analysts, they seem to be driving the narrative a lot more. And it's not that the other consultancies aren't doing this or the other analysts aren't doing this. It just seems like they are the ones that are defining the terms. They're defining what's going on. They're coming out with stuff like this, like every other week. So this was just published last week. And I just want to draw attention to the very first sentence, which says by 2024, 80% of technology products and services will be built by those who are not technology professionals, right? According to Gartner. So what I want to know from you guys is I'm just going to kind of throw this out there. Number one, are we being we tend to be optimistic anyway when we talk about forecasting, business forecasting. That's par for the course. But we hear the numbers, 500 million apps built by 2025, and everyone's going to be building apps, even your grandmother, right? Number one, right? What is the difference between low code and no code what's the definition between the two that we can all agree on? And then number two, are the analysts and the business forecasters being way too optimistic and aggressive in their assumptions that we're going to be able to do this when we just came out of a pandemic?
Good question. Yeah, and actually, I'll start with one of the ending statements. That's one of the reasons we call low code, no code. We just call it low code, no code, right? Because the definition really, it's used pretty wildly. So, I mean, if we take it in chronological order, low code came first, right? And it was I guess, beyond fourth generation programming languages, it's the increased abstraction to effectively make it faster and easier to develop, right? And these platforms originally targeted at your typical pro developer, just made them more efficient at doing what they do, right? Shortcuts, visual drag and drop, it started to make an appearance. Then some about 5 years later, the first kind of no-code, first generation no-code platform started to show up, and they started to actually have it as a value prop that you can actually build an entire application without any code, right? But you can also do that in many low-code platforms today, right? And in fact, some of those original incumbent players have now added no-code features to their platform. So it's a very blurry continuum where you sit. You have got pure play low-code players, and they continue to refer to themselves as low-code, largely because they don't want to disenfranchise their original adopters, right? The traditional IT department. But they recognize that their platforms are intuitive enough that they can be used by business people or non-technology professionals, as Gartner says, right? And the other end of the spectrum, you've got the kind of newer no-code players who, some of them are saying, yes, we are fully no-code. We won't even allow you to go into the back end and play with the code. And they say that's because, it makes applications more resilient as, the IT ecosystem starts to change around, right?
Right.
But, really you will find when you dig that there's always a backdoor, right? You might want some functionality that the no-code platform doesn't provide out of the box. And so they give you a little backdoor, a little console here or there so you can add your widgets and stuff. So really, I mean, if we were being completely blunt, they're all really a state of low code, right? With an option. And I think some of them are more true to the moniker. Others kind of use it as a bit of a marketing buzz, at least to signify to their audience who they're really catering to. And that's for that reason, we typically could just refer to them low code, no code.
Okay, interesting. However, having said that, and I think that's a great definition. It's funny because we tend to, over here at T25, we focus on no code. And that's because, we have literally non-technical people in our, we're like 35% tech folks and the rest are non-tech, and that's they're all professionals, marketers and product people and everything. And so it gets really, people get scared away by terms. I'm talking about just ordinary people. I mean, business people we get it, but I think we're going to see more clarification in this as we move forward. So it's really interesting. And speaking of which, regarding this, and this is another reason why we are here today, I just want to put this up really quickly because this is very important. This is the reason for this event. And this is the reality that I'm going to ask you about, because this is what we're looking at according to a recent survey, and I will put the link to the survey and everything that I'm speaking about, everyone, don't worry, I will give you links to everything I mentioned. And if you don't get it in the sidebar, which you will, we'll also be sending them to you via email in a thank you email. So 82% out of 1,000 professionals, 82% have no idea what no code means, and only 18% basically are familiar with no code. And so you have to wonder, looking at this, and this was I think the survey was of 1,000 professionals around the world. And this was about 2 months ago. You have to wonder, with most people not knowing what no code is, and let's just begin about the terminology for a minute. We have our work cut out for us. And from an HR perspective, I wonder, when you see that, what you think, is that something that should be keeping us up at night? Because these are people that need to be trained in a lot of what goes into making someone an effective citizen developer. And that falls a lot in your realm, right?
It's very interesting. I would imagine of that percentage, if it kind of intuitively feels right to me, most people either don't know or don't care. That's an interesting phenomenon. Like, what is it about technology over the course of time that has caused people not to care that much? I would also say there is a percentage of people that probably have used low code, no code applications already, but haven't categorized them as such. I mean, Arjun mentioned things like Wix, for instance, Squarespace. That is almost one of the very first and obvious examples. Anybody who's produced one of those things could be could be described as an active user of this technology, right? And there's loads of those types of things out there. So there's also this, I guess, this idea of, are they accurately observing what is going on in the wider market? Bottom line is this, with the use of these technologies in the workspace, though, is that most people are not going to use these tools unless there is a purpose for it. The people that are doing applications with any of these low code, no code technologies, they are either solving a specific problem that they have at work that they've just figured out, hey, if I just MacGyver this thing together, it's going to save me it's going to do the job that basically I don't have the budget to go and buy some stuff. That's exactly a Brainfood's experience, by the way. If you look at all of the stuff that is involved in recruiting Brainfood, that's basically been hacked together by myself and my cousin, using, various things like Tableau, Google Scripts here, various bits and bobs of websites. Basically, because when I started, I couldn't afford to spend anything. It was like, what was the point in buying something or paying a pro developer to do it when the output wasn't technically that difficult? I just want to display a load of data, for instance, and have a page online. That was the problem I solved. And you could solve it using kind of these types of tools. And there's also, of course, this category of tools that will help connect different apps together, the Zapier style things that are out there. So it needs to come with a purpose. So you got to think, okay, you're a worker, professional. They surveyed 1,000 professionals. What kind of professional are you, and what purpose what problem are you encountering in the world of work that isn't being solved by a corporate bought or enterprise bought service that's caused you to spend extra time piecing this together? The chances are that problem is not going to be something that is persistent enough for them to do that. I can imagine, for instance, let's say you're a lawyer. You are doing something that's very laborious, very manual. Are you going to spend extra time even trying to figure out how to plug something together? Or are you going to complain to your boss to buy a bit of software? Or are you going to get an intern to say, do this for me on the weekend? There's a particular set of circumstances, I think, which generate sort of the need to do low code, no code. I think there's actually a very good reason to expect that places in the not-for-profit sector, for instance, will be very quick adopters of this, because there literally is never a budget, or there's hyper budget constraints. There is no intern, that you can't push it to nobody. You got to go do it yourself. That type of person, I think it will emerge. But where there's other, I can imagine if you're a professional, you say this is not worth my time. Pass it off to some junior, then yeah, it's not going to be. They're not going to learn those skills. No, they're not going to get into it.
That's awesome. And I'm going to your point, I'm going to bring you in on this, Arjun, as soon as I'm going to show something on the screen really quickly. So here's the thing, Hung, that's really interesting, because the question that I have for you later on is going to be along the lines of, well, how do you incentivize? How are we going to incentivize? Because they make it sound like, we offer solutions to this, but they make it sound like millions of workers are just going to pick up the no code and just be like, whoa, or low code. And, it's not that easy. You can't even convince people to come back to the office. Okay. I mean, and when they do, they might quit on you in a week. So who's building these apps and why, and what's in it for me? So I think that's the economy that we're moving into right now, which is what's in it for me. It's got to be more than me just building a new skill, because you guys told me to learn to code 3 years ago. I spent $5K on some boot camp and I learned to code, and now you're telling me no code. And so this is getting, Arjun, I want your feedback on this. Yeah, no, I'm going to get back to you, Hung. I'm going to show you guys something that just came in today. This is breaking news. Well, maybe not, but it's close enough. So here's the deal, guys. I'm going to show you the screen really quickly, and I have to put it on screen because it's kind of like, it's one of these things. So today on the Wall Street Journal podcast, which I love their podcast. They had this whole podcast, I'll put the link in the show notes, based on the idea that gig workers are embracing apps to make their jobs easier. So I said, okay, let me listen to this. Let's see what we got going on. Well, it turns out that the gig workers, the drivers for Uber and Lyft, are developing, and this is just since we started coming out of the pandemic, are developing their own apps to solutions to problems that they're seeing and dealing with that they can't even express to the company because they aren't quote unquote employees yet, right? And so they're doing it amongst themselves, and they're doing it quickly and effectively, and they actually are technically building little companies based on, and so what's happening is, and this is what I'm going to throw to you, Arjun, because this is really fascinating. Let me stop sharing my screen. You guys have to listen to this podcast, by the way. I'm going to put it in the show notes. So here's the thing, Arjun, right? So I'm listening to this, and the question everybody wants to know is this. Well, now, wait a minute. If drivers are drivers, right, who are under enormous pressure right now because there's a shortage of drivers, as we all know, there's a shortage of employees everywhere. Like, I don't know where everybody's quitting and going where they're going, but Lyft and Uber are really struggling to find drivers. So the drivers they do have are struggling right now. So they're coming up with their own solutions. So what do the companies think about this? And how are the companies, because in a lot of ways, the solutions that they're coming up with, for example, I think the company is skimming money off of my tips. And there's an app for that now, right? So that a driver created. So the journalists asked both companies, what do you think about this, the drivers who are creating apps based on low code, no code, whatever? And both companies gave the same response. And they said this, drum roll, please. They said, well, we can't do it in-house because we don't know what they're experiencing out there on the road as well as they do. They aren't employees yet, so we can't possibly we don't even have a mechanism or a channel to get that feedback from them in a substantive way to include them in the innovation that happens in-house. And frankly, they can develop this stuff quicker than we can. So not only are we letting them do it, but we're partnering with them. Hey, right? We're coming in on their apps and giving them. So Arjun, I would love to know from your perspective what you think about all this, because this isn't top down, it isn't bottom up. It's like outside in, or the freelancers, the gig workers.
It's entirely organic. It's driven by a need, and I entirely agree with the Uber and Lyft's response, that the first half of it, at least, the part where they said, well, we're not in a position because we don't know what the problems they are experiencing, right? And citizen development it's really about those who are facing the problems turning their ideas into apps, right? And so it's a really cool use case. I hadn't heard this one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't buy into their argument that they can't actually, create some sort of interface where they can speak to them, regardless of whether they're employees or not. That's a bit of a cop-out, frankly. It's something they should be harnessing and nurturing, right? Of course, it shouldn't always be driven by, can I make some money out of this, right? It is absolutely something that their quote-unquote non-employees, their gig workers they're facing, right? And so they're trying to address these problems. I think that Uber and Lyft should be thinking about how they can provision these centrally, right? There's no reason they can't harvest some of these ideas and then almost creating an app store for their drivers. Hey, by the way, a lot of your drivers have experienced these problems, and these apps have been created, and they have created a nice little rating system and feedback. So those who've created it then can start to think, okay, how can I improve this, right? And then you've created an entire stream, and who knows, some of these guys might end up setting up their own startups. So I think it's a really cool kind of event, and I think Uber and Lyft should be supporting it rather than staying once removed and waiting for the dollars to appear.
I love that. I couldn't agree more, Hung. This is where you come in, Hung, because Hung, as an employee, I might be doing this. There are no-code communities and low-code communities out there where people can go and just learn on their own. There's so many around the world. Shout out to all of them. They are helping people to figure out how to create things. They're just building things. It's time to build. So as an employee, as a candidate, right? I'm trying to come to your company, and I'm considering working for your company, or you have employees in the company already. How do you make this an incentive? How do you make this an incentive for workers to come to your company? Because right now you got to throw out, HR has to really try everything to get people to come in. And then also, what do you say to the other departments? What do you say to the CLOs and companies? What do you say to the business folks about how they can think about structuring this so that employees get more out of this than a pat on the back? Is that even a fair question? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm saying these companies are going to be saving a lot of money by 2025. And there's a lot of research out there on low code and no code. Okay. So my whole thing is, will the employees see a piece of the action? Is that fair to even ask? Is it possible?
Every question's fair, Charlie. Just throw them out. I think we've got to try and deal with them as best we can. You know what? just listening to that example, I agree with Arjun, really interesting case. It just got me thinking about maybe a deeper barrier that causes companies to and employees to not necessarily align in low code, no code, and that's ownership. Like, who owns the software that's produced by the employee? Who owns the data that runs through it? How do we stay compliant? You say you're building interface with the core systems. Okay, we can imagine IT guys saying no chance. Are you going to do that? So I think we might even need to be thinking about what structure of organization is best suited to support the widespread adoption of a bunch of employees that are super activated in developing apps. Now, it's interesting we talk about Lyft and Uber because there is a bit of a distance there's a legal distance between the people driving the cars and the people running the software. They're not employees. And I wonder whether that's actually one of the key components, one of the key reasons why these apps are being developed, because the drivers didn't have a choice. They couldn't complain to somebody to say, where is this software? They didn't have channels to do that. There was a distance between the two. If they were fully employed cab drivers and all they were cab drivers, you would not imagine that situation not only occurring, but you can imagine the centralized IT department coming down hard on anybody producing rogue apps and trying to plug into a database and pulling it out. And, no chance is that happening. So I think the low code, no code environment probably best suits a much looser set of relationships between the central organization and the people that might work in it. It might emerge from, again, I'm keep on thinking about not-for-profit type enterprises. I keep thinking about communities of interest that come together and build stuff toward a common goal. I think about maybe even cooperatives where a bunch of reasonably skilled people gather together to build a system or product and share profit from it. But is it exactly the same as employer-employee relationship? I just think you're going to get a lot of vested interest saying no, both for risk, compliance, ownership, all that kind of stuff in there. Like I say, that's just popped into my head when you talked about the relationship between drivers and these ride shares. It might be that's the setting where these things emerge.
That's a great point. Okay, Arjun, I'm gonna throw this back to you, and I'm gonna actually bring it back into the enterprise, into the sort of the IT realm. We talk about jobs and the software developers, which Hung you mentioned, and especially regarding, this is huge. We don't talk enough about this, which is the governance. Okay, I'm gonna show this really quickly because I want to know what you think about this. What would you say to this person, who is a real person, by the way? I read this on, this is an article called, that just came out a couple of days ago, called Are Low Code and No Code Ready for Sophisticated Development? That's the key word here, right? So that was an article, and it was posted on Hacker News, which is a development community. And one of the respondents, one of the commenters said the following, a software developer: being a software developer, I find little joy in supporting complex applications that are built on a black box full of quirks you need to learn and memorize. It's like a tech support job. What I can see happening is companies forcing the tech department to suddenly support all these new apps. And for me, that'd be quite the reason to quit. So here's the thing about that. I'm hearing that a lot. And I'm not just hearing it about this, I'm hearing it in regards to giving ordinary non-tech people the ability to create apps. And even with governance, even with great governance, things are going to happen. It's still going to fall on IT. So Arjun, what would you say to this person? But also, is this the beginning of a problem that's going to cause software developers to recoil and quit, and for other reasons, right? They're not being replaced by the technology, but they're feeling like, I don't need this crap. I don't need to
inherit all of that mess, right? Or potentially. But yeah, so I think first thing I'd say is I empathize, right? You don't want to inherit that. It's if citizen development takes off in the company, and hopefully it will, right? Because it's generating value, you absolutely do not want to be inheriting an app or 2 or 3 a week, right, and figuring out how to support it. The workload is just going to go skyrocket, and right, these are going to be potentially lower priority activities that you're going to be doing. You want to be focusing on the heavy lifting, on the more strategic kind of things, right? So totally empathize with that point of view. But what's interesting, right? And we actually have a live case that we're actually working with the clients on. It is the IT department who's come to us and said they want to deploy citizen development. They recognize the value it can drive, and they want to do this in a really sensible and open way. But they do not want to manage or support the in-life apps that are being churned out by the business. They want them, quite happy for them to have the keys and knock themselves out, build their stuff, but they must support it. Or at least some sort of quasi IT business interface body needs to be set up to look after that. And that, in fact, that's pretty much what we do recommend, right? Because if there's a problem with the underlying no-code and low-code platform, that's a technical issue. There's a glitch or something, there's a bug. That's when the IT department gets involved, right? But for all of those individual apps within this library of apps, they don't need to support that. These are functional designs, right? That should be the remit of the person who built it, or at the very least have some sort of mechanism where you transition it to, as I said, this center of excellence, so to speak, which actually exists purely to provide that kind of first line support. This way, you get the best of both worlds. IT can focus on the heavy lifting as and when they're needed, but the business is very close to the problem. They understand and they can support things functionally. That's pretty much the only solution that we've come up with at the moment. Because as we said, we're expecting this to grow and scale, and we're expecting thousands and thousands of apps to be built at this company. So,
so how do you do this? And I mean, Hung, you can jump in anytime. How do you do this? How do companies? This is huge because, as we know, people are quitting right now, not just because they're trying to find out what they want to do with their lives, and there's a lot happening. Ultimately, it boils down to culture. Okay, and if an employee feels that a workplace culture is not what it is, not what it should be, I'm out. As they say, life is too short, YOLO, right? So we're asking companies to build, to basically create their new workplace culture in the throes or in the shadows of a pandemic, right? With technologies that they have to sort of push out very quickly because there's a demand from consumers. My question is, how can companies be more intentional? And Hung, maybe this is for you with the HR angle, be more intentional about the culture that they create through this no-code, low-code situation. In other words, we don't want to go, oopsie, this is our culture now. You know what I mean? I mean, how can they be intentional about this? Can they be?
I've got no idea. I haven't got a clue. It's the truth. I think a lot of this is going to be like, I don't think it will be intentional. It'll emerge because there'll be some random person in an unexpected job, or so in a job that you wouldn't expect, that they'll just come up with something genius that'll suddenly be, why didn't we build this? And that thing will be the thing that works. I don't think you can be strategic overly much with this entire idea of distributing creative capacity to the employee base. Like a big part of it is actually letting go of the general strategy. I think the wrong thing to do would be hey, everybody get building apps and just browbeating everyone to suddenly build these things. That's not that you're going to produce a bunch of crap. That's what's going to happen. This needs to be really organic. It needs to be emergent from people that have the interest, the combination of the capacity, the interest, and the problem that's going to be solved. So it'll be very local to a particular function, maybe even to a particular individual. And then, of course, the tooling needs to be there for that person to be able to effectively put it together without expending huge amounts of time. Because remember, it needs to be no code, low code, right? If this person ends up spending 3 months doing it, then effectively that person's seconded into being a developer. This person has an operating job to do. So this thing needs to be done quick so that person can get on with the job and do it better. So it can't ever be core process or core function for this person. I think that's probably one of the definitions of low code, no code, in my opinion, would probably be that is there shouldn't be. You showed me some job descriptions before about having a no code, low code developer. Straight away I thought, hang on, about what does that mean? I mean, surely the idea of low code, no code is that actually a lawyer could do that, or a secretary should be able to do that. You shouldn't require a specialist to do it. It's inherently not a specialism. So anyway, lots of things to think about. Is it strategic? Probably not.
All right, I'm going to push back on that a little bit one day, maybe not right now. I agree with you actually to some degree, but Arjun, I got to bring you in on this because here's the deal. What are you seeing? Let's talk about the skills that are absolutely necessary, because the skills that are required to work with these apps are a little different than the skills that are required in obviously in IT. And so regarding skill set, what are you seeing as being the absolute necessity for people, for ordinary workers who are non-tech, to master now? Like, in other words, they've been up, they might feel like they want to do this and pick up a platform, no code app tomorrow and start testing it on them just for themselves. What can I do with this? What's the skill set that's needed? Design.
That's a good question, right? So I suppose when you pick up a low code or no code platform, right, it's going to come with some documentation or some training courses which teach you how to use the platform, right? We use an analogy of buying a car, right? Let's say the low code or no code platform is a car, right? That car is going to come with a manual which tells you how to switch on the high beam or the windscreen wipers, so you understand the functionality of the car. What it doesn't teach you to do is how to drive that car safely or respect the road rules, right? So I think absolutely, for those people who haven't spent a life in education learning about computer science or how to build applications, right, there's a lot of stuff that isn't intuitive, right? And so you need to effectively have a crash course. Forgive the inverse pun there, but you have to have a crash course in what is, what are the best practices around application development? What's the best practices around creating a user interface that delights, right? Or that encourages people, or that intuitively designed. And really, I mean, that's what we've been doing at PMI. We've identified that there is this missing piece in the puzzle, right? If you're going to have these superpowered tools which allow you to go and construct anything, you want to make sure that what people construct isn't, opening up a can of worms. Right? In order to do that, yes, they absolutely need to understand some user interface best practices. They need to understand the basics of a database, right? But all of this can be delivered in a very intuitive way. You absolutely do not need to go and do a significant course. Just go check out the PMI courses, right? That'll sort you out.
That's it, right? That's a great law. But actually, I took one of them because I wanted to see kind of how you guys were doing it. And I love the way that you did it, because even at the beginning stage, and you just kind of want to know what it is, I like that you walk people through it. You don't make assumptions about what people know and don't know. You have to get everybody on the same page. And you also include the governance and the different things about what departments would need. Very important. And to that end, two things. Number one, we didn't really get into this, but the coding schools, right? This kind of has to be eating into their little oatmeal, right? a little bit. I mean,
interesting point. Yeah. So I almost think it shouldn't eat into it. It changes what they deliver,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because you're moving from syntax and code and actually typing out strings of letters that mean something to a computer, to using visual images which mean things to a computer, right? So we're still constructing a logical series of events, perhaps automating it, right? That still needs to be the learning. They need to focus, these coding schools need to focus on how to code and why to code in a certain way, why to build applications in a way that delights the customer. Right, so I think there's absolutely a need for them, right? It's just a different tool.
It's a very different. And so someone just asked about the no code platforms. What is a zero code platform? There are literally so many. We can each throw out one, right?
Do you want us to name some?
Yeah, guys, I'm gonna put in I'll put in the link a link to a big infographic that has them.
There are so many. I mean, by last count, there was about 550 low code and no code platforms, and it seems almost every week, perhaps even every day, a new one turns up. But I guess the big players, certainly in the enterprise space, are the usual suspects. You've got Microsoft. Wow, there you go.
Yeah. Someone just actually put this together. It's a developer. I'm not saying this is by any means, this is not comprehensive. I think he just sort of picked the big ones or whatever. But I'll include this just because I couldn't really find anything else that was really, but this will give you an idea of and I like the way you broke it down into different types of no-code platforms. But
that is pretty cool.
That is very cool that he did this. So you see, this is, and he's a coder, and he's like, yeah, I just want to, so you guys don't worry about it. I'm going to include that as well in everything that I give you. But finally, I actually just want to make sure that we cover this because this is really important. So we have 3 job listings right now regarding no code. Yes, I sent that to you guys. We're not going to go too far into it, but I do want to show sort of what these job listings are looking like today. Now they're going to change a lot in the next couple of years, right? A couple of months, hell. But if you do a search of no code, I'm just going to show it while I'm talking, and then I'll be asking you guys questions. If you do a search of no code, I did a search for no code on Indeed, right? And I've been doing it now for a while because I want to track and see what's going on. You get a good number of things, but it's usually for people who can develop no code platforms, or so you're talking about developers. This is one that's literally for someone who is a non-technical person. And I love that they specifically are looking for someone who's a product manager, or they'll be working with a product manager. And what stood out about this for me was, if we end up building something that doesn't work best when implemented with a certain no-code tool, you have the freedom to propose and go ahead with what you believe is the most efficient way to move forward. Now, this isn't a job post. Hung, when you see this, what are your first thoughts about this job post in terms of it being effective at them bringing in the talent that they need, and maybe from the job seeker's perspective, like, looks good to me, but I don't know.
You know, it's really interesting because when you put a job ad, I mean, you can critique the job ad. So the problem with asking me this question, Charlie, is that I end up being a recruiter suddenly, I end up, and it's like that annoying guy that is a film critic that watches a movie and can't actually enjoy the movie. So I want to end up breaking this down and saying you shouldn't say this.
Well, you can make it broader though. You can make it, let's say, in terms of like if someone in HR, and you got a lot of HR professionals who are thinking about this, and maybe they have people in the business departments coming to them and saying, we need this, we need that.
What's interesting here is that this is obviously an agency, right? So this is a very particular type of organization. So this organization goes to a customer and produces some sort of software. That's the output for this. So they're effectively a software development agency. But it looks like what they're doing is that they're getting people they're tapping into probably the cheaper way of producing this software or this solution is by using some of these apps that allow a no-code, low-code solution. So that's interesting for me for one reason, because it does kind of outline a use case that we haven't talked about yet, which is there's always going to be a bunch of people that don't want to get involved in this. So even if you provide the solutions like very clearly, it's like A, B, C, put them together, you get a word, go and do that. There's going to be a bunch of people that said, "No, you do it. I'll pay you to do it." And this is what this company seems to be servicing. So it could be, there's going to be an emergent group of businesses that do that will help stitch together, a bunch of those apps that you presented in that wonderful market map previously. Someone's going to have to know all those apps. I mean, Arjun said there's 500 of them plus, right? So there's going to be time required to understand which ones actually integrate best and how do you put together that solution. So almost like a sommelier would know how to serve a glass of wine according to the meal that you're about to eat. Right. There might be, developers or agencies that do that type of service. It doesn't mean that you can't, pick out the wine. Is that you want someone else to do it for you? You want to just enjoy your meal. So yeah, this tells me that there could be an industry growing up that would deliver no-code solutions to companies, very much actually like software development agencies do now, but presumably at lower rate and presumably at much quicker turnaround.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. I love that perspective. That's really insightful, actually. And so, okay, now we are actually, we were supposed to end 2 minutes ago. I apologize for running a little late. I'm going to wrap on this. I really want to get Arjun's feedback on this as well, because there were two other, there was one that was based on, on being a citizen developer. And I think that's really important because Arjun, that being a citizen developer in an enterprise company is still very new, and it's still very sort of vague, right? For everyone. So I would love from your perspective if you can sort of give me some of in terms of skills. This is just going into this particular job posting again on Indeed. It's still live on Indeed. I put the links in the bar to the right to the comments. This is really interesting because they want someone to be a citizen developer. And I don't find these posts a lot. I do a lot of searches for citizen developers, and it's not really out there yet as much as no code and low code. So Arjun, looking at this and looking at what they're asking for, I mean, do you see anything here that makes you go, what? Or like, I'm just wondering, because I look at this and I'm like, wow, they've really.
Yeah, so and I'm sure Hung probably agree with me. This looks like a pretty standard request for a normal developer, right?
Right.
I'm quite enthusiastic about the fact that they're using the term citizen developer, and I know we're going to see more of that. And I know, ServiceNow, obviously a very big player in the service management space, and I know their platform is quite intuitive, so I can understand why they're using that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they don't really have much of the kind of magic that was in the previous job advert, right? A bit more to the citizen. Yeah. So look, and to Hung's point, right? Not everyone is cut out to be a citizen developer, right? They probably have no inclination to do it. I'd rather be served it in many cases. I mean, I'm the kind of person who sees a button and say, what does that button do? So I'm quite inquisitive and I like to find out things. I like to build things, right? So assuming there are other people, I mean, if they saw that advert, I probably I'd take a double take at the title, but then when I looked at the content, I think, okay, that doesn't really inspire me as yet. So I think there needs to be a bit more magic, talking about the fact that, you can figure out your own problems, right? Figure out how to address them and create an app to address
and
your own.
Use freedom. You'll get freedom. It's like
exactly. I think that's a piece of the puzzle they really need to start to play out, because ultimately, right, it's not going to be a core of your job as a citizen developer, right? You might be a sales analyst, right? And indeed, your entire role is to close leads and close business. But right, if you're going to spend some time to actually build an app, it should be a mighty important piece of your work, and it should be endorsed, right? So I think they need to kind of articulate, well, this isn't the core of your job, right? Because when I look at that, it looks like you're a core developer for ServiceNow.
Well, that's important that you say that as we close out, guys. It's important that you bring up that point, because a lot of people are probably thinking, well, I want to be a citizen developer, like thinking that that's a job category. And listen, we don't know if it will be in the future or whatever, but certainly it will take time to get there, right? And so of the three, this is the last job post that I think is really relevant to this conversation. Wells Fargo posted, and this is still online, by the way, if you're looking for a gig, job, here you go, financial lead consultant. Now they have this long post, as you can imagine, because it's Wells Fargo, about what they're looking for with your expertise. I basically put the list of qualifications here. And as you can see, you go down and almost at the bottom, experience with low code, no code data to automate or enhance processes. I think that's probably a good, of the three, I don't know, they're all different, but do you see how things can play out differently? And I think Wells Fargo did pretty good with that by just making it almost a footnote, right?
it's a line item, right? And that's what it should be, right? It's a citizen developer. You're not a pro developer. It is not your bread and butter, right? It's almost like a new tool in your arsenal. It's a new feather in your cap. And I think they could improve it. I'm sure Hung can always improve those things, but from reading that, it kind of resonates a bit more if I was a finance person and I thought, hey, okay, cool, there's a technical component to the role where I'd have freedom to actually automate things or create new ideas. That's exciting.
So it's very exciting. And so that's a great way to leave off on things. I'm not seeing any more questions in the well, there's one, and I just will ask this really quick because it's just one. And Dr. Steve Lindo, hi, how are you, Dr. Lindo? He actually works with helping the next generation students with developing, and we use no code in a challenge that he did with students recently, which was awesome. Young teenage girls coming up with ideas for an app. And so anyway, he says, awesome discourse and panelists. Thank you. My question is about trust. Yes, adoption for new technologies has always been about trust, whether it's cloud computing, AI, ML, predictive analytics, et cetera. No code, low code, has been around for quite some, he knows it's been around for quite some time by now, but adoption is still very low. What do low code platforms need to do to improve adoption? Also, with the pervasiveness of cybercrime, thank you for bringing that up. where do you think the intersection between those two major areas will leave low-code platforms? That's a great question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, especially with cybercrime. And actually, that was on my list regarding the cybercrime, because you've got all these people, you've got the whole organization developing all these apps, and it's all app heaven, but it also undeniably makes us more vulnerable with regards to cybercrime. So
could be potentially Pandora's box if you don't make sure that it's about finding that right balance between, you know, draconian command and control and complete autonomy, right? And you need to find out where that sits in your organization. It will differ, right? If you're a financially regulated, you know, you're gonna have some pretty robust measures in place, and you definitely do not want to have those kind of risks manifesting. So absolutely, you know, cybercrime is something you need to be aware of when you are deciding on the kind of rules of engagement and deciding what kind of technical enforcements you place on the platform, what kind of data people can access, what kind of widgets they can use. All of that needs to be, decided upon, and it needs to be, the IT department is the custodian of these things, right? They need to mandate these rules. Of course, you know, cybercrime is something that happens regardless of whether you're using a low-code or no-code platform, but the risk is that much there when you haven't got a veteran professional building the app. So that needs to be contended with. But in terms of the adoption, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. So adoption hasn't been super high, but I think it's definitely going in that direction, perhaps slower than some might hope. But I think a large part of the problem has been, you're right, it is about trust. It's about confidence as well, right? It's how many CIOs are going to let all of their business people knock themselves out in their IT ecosystems, right? It's a terrifying thought, right? And I've spoken to numerous CTOs and CIOs who actually visibly balk at the idea, right? And they said there's no way we'd ever let that happen, right? You can understand where they're coming from.
Especially with the hybrid workforce now, because they don't even, a lot of them don't even like the fact that they have to deal with a remote workforce it's difficult to collaborate as it is in these new environments. So add to that the idea of collaborating on, so I don't know, it's complicated. It
is, and you know, like the vast amount of I guess shadow IT collaborative tools we use. I mean, WhatsApp is effectively a shadow IT tool, and a lot of business gets done on it, right? So I can understand the fear, right, that this can cause, right? Right. So I do think trust is a major point in the adoption, and that's very much what I suppose why the vendors are so excited about the PMI angle, right? Because we are creating that trust. We are effectively removing risk off the table for the CI and the CTO. We're basically saying, hey, make sure you get people trained up, upskilled to a certain level, right? So that such that they can participate in this movement, and you don't have to have an aneurysm every time someone builds something. So I agree with the sentiment that Stephen's put, and it's a great question.
It's a great question. And listen, we kept you all, including our panelists, a few minutes longer than I apologize for that, but I didn't want to not get as much in there. So I thank you guys so much for this. And I'm going to take us out. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to put there are links over to the right for you guys to most of the stuff that I've mentioned. But don't worry, we'll send you a thank you email. We'll have the video. We'll have all the links. So I'm going to send this out with our two speakers giving us advice on how to move forward in these no code streets, as they say. So I'm going to start with you, Hum. All right. So let's say we have HR people who are on the call right now, and they're thinking, well, where do I begin? You know, we're not doing this at our company yet, or we're just beginning to go, what's the next step for me with regards to understanding how to maybe begin to have these conversations in-house? What do you say to them? And then what do you say to people who are employees or job seekers looking for work, who are thinking about this in terms of a skills building perspective? What do you say to both of those people?
I think you go back to the Wells Fargo ad, and you see that bullet point as, you know, they're looking for this. That's how everyone needs to think about their resume and their CV, because they need to understand that this could be a very important part of their job, part of any job, your ability to automate and improve efficiency in your local tasks. So have that in mind. This is going to, if that's a bullet point you can put in your resume and your CV, that's going to improve your chances in future marketability. How to shift your mindset? You know what? I would say you go onto TikTok you follow a bunch of people that do things like Excel in 60 seconds, and they will show you magic in Excel. Like you would not believe. Excel is like, okay, that's not low code, no code. Actually, it is, because if you check it out, you can do incredible stuff in there that you just not believe. There was this one person that showed me how to actually generate barcodes, unique barcodes with a script. And I just couldn't believe my eyes. Like, how the hell can you do that? But he did it in 60 seconds. Now that gives you a little bit of magic that tells you, you know what, holy crap, my understanding of that piece of software, which I use to basically just type it in as a store of record, you know, it's actually a computing software that can create amazing things for you. Learn how to do that. And that, I think, opens the door. Any other kind of anything on your market map after you get a little bit more advanced in Excel, I think you take it very easily.
Okay, you just blew our mind. You just blew our mind with that TikTok. Did you see us taking notes of the TikTok? Okay, thank you, Hong.
That was the first time I've actually been given a proper reason to download TikTok.
I'll see you there, because I'm getting on it too, my old self.
Trust me, Arjun, there's lots of reasons to download TikTok, man. But that's one of those.
It's one of those reasons.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
Arjun, we're gonna ask you to. I'm gonna leave on you talking to the technical people in our audience, the CIOs, CTOs, IT managers, folks who are trying to figure out how to do this without destroying the company, right? like without creating chaos. How to reel things in, or how to create a system that reels things in before things get out of control, right? So what do you say to the CIOs and CTOs on the call now, or even just IT people, software developers, who are looking at this and going, oh, for God's sakes, how are we going to roll out this type of thing and make it work and bring it in under a governance that is flexible, that allows for creativity, but that also keeps them from ruining everything? What's your advice on next steps?
Yeah, so I think so. You know, this is not something that can happen without IT in the room. In fact, IT needs to be the custodian of this platform, right? They need to enforce the guardrails. So this isn't about sidestepping IT. It's about actually partnering with the IT at moments that matter, so to speak, right? So knowing that you are a partner, you are enabling the business to actually be a bit more self-serving, right? It's actually quite a great setup. You are giving them the tools and empowering them to take some of your burden away. Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want that to work, right? And it's natural. Those business people who are sitting there at the shop front, they are the experts of their domains. They know the problems that they have. They fully recognize the inefficiencies or the bottlenecks that they have to deal with daily, right? Give them the tools to sort that out, right? But make sure they are suitably skilled to do it. And of course, that they want to. Not everyone is going to be a citizen developer, right? So you're not going to have a situation where every single person in the company is building an app. It simply won't happen. But there will be a few people who are willing to do it. So just make sure that they have a clear line of sight of how to do it, who they need to reach out to get support, and make sure that they're rewarded and recognized for their contributions. I think ultimately, right, you are the custodian as an IT person, so you need to introduce this before the business does, because they sometimes do it behind the curtains, right? And you don't want that.
No, we don't want that. No one wants that. So, all right, listen, you guys have been wonderful. Hong, Arjun, thank you so much for your time and for everything, guys. Apologize for going overboard, but I'm going to get you this video. We will put their contact information in that email as well. And have a wonderful day, and just go out and build something. You don't need permission to do it, just do it. Just don't do it on your company's, to do it. They'd be like, Charlie told me. Oh God. Okay, have a great day, guys. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.